Hi, I'm Dave Summers, Director of Digital Media Production here at the AMA. Welcome to today's webcast entitled Strategies to Build and Align Your Frontline Leadership Team. I'd like to introduce our guest presenter for today's program, Paul Falcone. Paul is a friend of the AMA. He's an AMACOM author, AMACOM being the publishing arm here of the AMA, and he's also helping us in the digital media team with other webcast and webinar programs we've done in the past, as well as appearing on our AMA Edgewise podcast program. Paul is an HR and leadership trainer, speaker, and executive coach. He's also a best-selling author and former corporate HR executive at Nickelodeon, Paramount Pictures, and Time Warner. His latest book, which much of this stuff will be derived from, is entitled 75 Ways for Managers to Hire, Develop, and Keep Great Employees. This book focuses on aligning frontline leadership teams and on key employee retention. He is the author of 4 books that were ranked on the SHRM's prestigious Great 8 annual bestseller listings, including 96 Great Interview Questions to Ask Before You Hire, 101 Tough Conversations to Have with Employees, 101 Sample Write-Ups for Documenting Employee Performance Problems, and 2,600 phrases for effective performance reviews. Paul is a longtime contributor to HR Magazine and an instructor in the UCLA Extension School of Business and Management, as well as a top-rated presenter at the SHRM National Conference. Paul, welcome back to our recordings here, our programs, our online web events. This is a really compelling topic and obviously something that is of direct interest to our core audience of new managers, middle managers, aspiring leaders. Why don't you get us started on this?
You make me sound very busy, Dave.
Well, you led me to believe you were.
Well, you know, a 7-page bio is always a good way to start. But, no, the idea of the book, everyone, so you know, is that as a VP of Human Resources at a number of larger companies, you know, the one thing I never had was a book to give my frontline leaders to get them all on the same page. So you think about your VPs, your directors, your managers, and your supervisors in the operational groups, and I'm in HR. And historically, I would give them books, you know, good to great, and First Break All the Rules, and these types of books, which are excellent books and they're bestsellers. But they're not about leadership in the trenches, and they're not necessarily about leadership with a heart, and how to uphold what I call an achievement mentality, and how to make sure that everyone's operating under the same set of assumptions in terms of ethics, and growing and developing their teams, and equally as important, you know, sidestepping litigation landmines so that you can sleep better at night because you know your managers are kind of on the same page. And so the funny thing for me, Dave, is that as the HR guy going through my career over the last 20 years and working in different companies, you see the same problems over and over again. And it's not that the leaders aren't bad people and they're not necessarily bad leaders. It's just that some things miss awareness. And you feel like if you could just tweak it a little bit, like how to look at the idea of leadership offense, which is growing and developing and making your people feel like you've got their back and that they can perform their best. And then you're looking at leadership defense, which is to make sure they're not stepping on litigation landmines or, you know, missing the importance of the record that's being created every time they overinflate someone's performance review. Or come storming into your office and say, I want the guy fired. And it's like, yeah, but you've never given him any progressive discipline. He's been here 20 years. You know, those kinds of things are actually fairly big on the Richter scale for HR people. And so the idea was, if I can put it all together in a book, all my stuff from my prior books into one compendium that talks about what I call, again, there's 4 parts: effective hiring, leadership offense, leadership defense, and the 4th part, which is what I call workplace wisdom. If you put that together, you can get everyone aligned on the same page very, very quickly, and that was the theory behind the book. Well, with the interviewing piece, because I do think that one of the challenges that managers have out there is they don't know how to interview, and interviewing is hard. I mean, you may have your MBA from a very prestigious school, but the truth of the matter is you've probably not taken a course on how to interview. And so one of the problems becomes there's not enough critical mass. You know, hiring managers in essence, don't necessarily know what questions to ask, or if they do, because their company says, you must ask all of these questions, they're not quite sure how to interpret their responses. And so one of the things that I would say is I had written a book called 96 Great Interview Questions to Ask Before You Hire, as you mentioned. And In theory, it was like, okay, I don't want to read a book from page 1 to page 240 to figure out what's going on. I've got an interview with a salesperson coming up. Give me the 10 questions that I need to ask, what I should expect and their answers, and how I interpret it. So that's kind of the theory of how I wrote that book. There's the college campus recruit, the senior executive recruit, the sales recruit, for the different kinds of hires that you'll typically do. But one of the things that I advocate in the new book is, I guess the best way to call it would be almost like career coaching interviewing. And the thing that's so cool about that is the purpose of the interview is to hire someone for your company who can do a great job for your company. But there's more than that. That's only half the equation. And I think managers are going to be missing out on an important aspect of this if they're only looking at it from a one-sided point of view. It's not so much what can the candidate do for your company. But in today's day and age, especially with millennials, I do think it's important that we're looking at what can the company do for the candidate. So my strategy is to build trust and rapport in the relationship. And I'm not saying add an extra 30 minutes to your interview, but maybe use some of these questions rather than what's your greatest strength and what's your greatest weakness and where do you see yourself in 5 years. For example, Dave, what I've always said was, question their reason for leaving. The question, what would be your next logical move in career progression if you remained with your current company? And how long would it take you to get there? And get a feel for why they're exploring things. The follow-up question is, what would joining our company do for you in terms of building your resume over the long term? I think that's a fair question. And it's not an easy question. Sometimes it demands some level of career introspection. Follow it up with questions like, what are the 2 or 3 criteria you're using right now in selecting your next role or company or industry? What's important to you? And another question along the same lines, from a professional development standpoint, what would the ideal opportunity look like for you in terms of your role, your responsibilities, the overall learning curve that you're looking for, Paul? What does that look like? And the final question that I love is, if you were to accept a position with us today, how would you explain that to a prospective employer 5 years from now? How would this role provide a link in your overall career progression? The logic is candidates are not going to sit there and say, oh, these are easy questions. They're not. It's going to throw them off a little bit at first because they've probably never been asked questions like this. But one of the keys to doing effective hiring is to make sure you're building that bond of trust. And if this works well, the candidates will sometimes look at you and say, oh, Dave, I normally don't say this in an interview, but, and then it's like, boom, there. Now you've got the real person. You've got the real person. You've made it safe for them to make themselves vulnerable. And that element of vulnerability is really critical in any employment relationship, and there's no reason it shouldn't start at the pre-employment stage during the interview. Because, first of all, you do need to understand why this does make sense for the candidate. The reason you've got 5 people that you've lined up for this interview, they all could do the job on paper. That's not really the issue. But one of the things you're looking for is obviously the personality match, and you're looking for the sense of desire factor. Why does this make sense? And of course, the reason for leaving is the link that drives someone's career progression forward. The reason for leaving their current company has to be fulfilled by coming to your company. Otherwise, you're going to end up losing that person in 6 to 18 months, and all that investment is going to be gone out the window anyway. When someone walks out of an interview like that, they're going to say, wow, these were tough questions. This was not easy. But I really like the fact that they focused on me. I've not been to a company that really took that level of interest in me. And if they're that interested in candidates in the pre-employment process, I'm going to guess that they take a real interest in people once they're hired. So in essence, what you're doing, Dave, is you're taking the employee development paradigm and you're shifting it to the front of the whole process, even before the person's hired. But those kinds of questions will beget loyalty. It'll make it safe for people to be vulnerable. And from the vulnerability comes a sense of trust, because you do want to make sure that this does make sense for them. And you're kind of forcing them to tease out that information. You're forcing them to articulate what really would make sense for them over the long haul and why this job will make a logical step in progression for them. No, I'm not expecting them to stay with me forever, but I want to make sure that they're going to stay around long enough that they're going to make a difference and have some stability.
Absolutely. I agree. I think it almost goes without saying, so therefore I am going to say it. If you hire the right people, so many other problems just go away, right? I mean, if you get it right on the front end, a lot of this other stuff isn't that big of an issue.
You got that right. Because if you hire, you know the ones that you've had in your career or on your team right now, that you don't have to do much for them. They just seem to always be happy. They motivate themselves. They find new ways of adding value. And you think, how hard is it to find that? Now, there's a corollary that I'll share that's always worked for me. I believe very strongly in checking references. Hire someone without checking references, it's like having a loose cannon on the deck of your ship, because they can interview one way and you don't know really what their performance is going to be. And again, for me, it's a very personal kind of phone call when I check a reference. I talk to the person about, this is the challenge we're looking to fill or find or whatever. And, I've talked with Dave, and I'm very impressed, but there are a couple of areas that I wanted to run by you, Miss Employer, as his former supervisor, to kind of get some insights into his ability to excel in our company. And before you know it, you're into a real dialogue and you're into a real question, because you're not just firing off, what's his greatest strength and what's his greatest weakness. You're kind of giving your share, your perspective on what you think you see, and you're asking them to kind of vet that. And you can look into the important things that make a match in terms of Paul's ability to accept constructive criticism, or his willingness to work longer hours and be flexible, or whatever it happens to be. But you can get to know the real person. And that becomes critical. And when I find I lock those two together, really good interviewing, selfless interviewing, where I'm asking the candidates to show a certain level of career introspection and vulnerability, combined with talking to 2 to 3 references that are giving me consistent feedback, it's a formula that's pretty much hard to beat. But to your point, you're absolutely right. If you get this part of it right, 90% of the pressure for everything else we're going to talk about how to motivate, engage, and make sure they're not making mistakes that are going to get your company in legal trouble, all of that stuff goes away because you made the hire right on the front end.
Okay, so let's assume we've hired some great people. What comes next?
I think part of it is establishing your leadership brand. And very few companies do this, and I think it's a mistake. You hire a new director of finance. They start on Monday. They go to Monday orientation. They sign up for benefits. They get a little punch in the arm and say, go get them, Tiger. We're here if you need us. That's it. They're off to the races, and you haven't done anything to kind of shepherd, to kind of mold what the expectations are of how you will lead our employees. We're going to make a blind assumption that the way you've led people in the past is exactly how you're going to do it here, and you're going to be a success. I think that's a mistake. And I think when we talk about this idea of personal branding, you have to kind of sit down with people and talk, whether you're the human resources executive who's meeting with the leaders that are newly hired, or you're the department head who's meeting with a new leader that's on your team. But you have to talk about, what are your big 5 or what are your big 10 issues? Well, I don't want them to figure out by which way the wind blows, or, oops, they stepped on a landmine. They didn't realize that Paul really hates it when something happens. You've got to kind of set that expectation right from the beginning. And it needs to talk about what I call an achievement mentality. It needs to talk about ethics. If your company has a code of conduct, if it's publicly traded, it has one. But a lot of private companies also have code of ethics and that kind of thing. We need to talk about those things. I've always had 8, and it's okay. You don't have to use my 8. You have to find your own, though. But one of the things would be, for me, for example, is praise in public, censure in private. I'm a very big believer in selfless leadership. What you want for yourself, give to another. Always assume good intentions and make sure your employees understand that you've got their back. Because I know that when employees feel like their boss has their back, they will perform twice as well as someone who is performing by fear of making a mistake. And another thing for me, one of my hot things is I always told them, you guys, no drama. I don't do drama. I want to have some fun. I want to celebrate success. But there can't be any drama. I just don't have any tolerance for it. So I want you to be clear that, we can talk about what that might look like, but, that's really, really important to me. And everyone on the team is going to say, oh, yeah, Paul always talks about no drama, blah, 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 blah. But set those expectations for them. Don't make them divine that. Don't make them figure it out on their own by making mistakes. I think you have to put that out there, and you can set your expectations in terms of what's the culture, how do we relate to one another, what does communication look like, what does teamwork mean to me as the VP in this department. Product, the achievement mentality, I tell them, I will help you build your resume. I will help you build your LinkedIn profile. I want you to think about bullets of achievements and how to really turn them into things that are either increasing revenue, decreasing costs, saving time. But in theory, if you're thinking about quantifying your achievements That's good for your self-evaluation when it comes time for your annual performance review. But it's also something where I want you to know that I will help you get ahead in your own career, whether it's here or elsewhere. If it means promoting you into another department, or even if you found something in another company, what I've always told them is I haven't had a lot of turnover on my teams. And I think it's because they feel that sense of trust. They know I have their back. But sometimes when they do move on, it's something that we celebrate. If we were able to help you move from a manager to director, even though we didn't have the opportunity here, I'm still going to do everything I can to help you move forward in your career. And I think people love that because if they feel like it's sincere, again, it creates a culture that says, I can trust my boss has my back, I can do my best work every day because I don't have to worry about drama coming from my boss and what mood he may be in, or am I tripping one of his hot buttons. So again, it puts people at rest and it helps them perform at a higher level.
Something that is kind of an issue for me that comes up frequently when we're in front of the microphone here with folks is this whole issue of culture. Where's your head at as it relates to corporate culture? Because culture is one of those things that, can you train culture? It's kind of like the oxygen you breathe. It's sort of like the fish tank that you swim in.
Yep, and the answer would be yes and no, depending how you look at it. The culture of the organization is the 30,000-foot level. The culture of what's going on in my department at any time is down in the weeds. And I can only control what I can control, which is the stuff that's down in the weeds. So part of the way I look at it is I understand that every company has its pluses and its minuses, the dysfunctionality quotient, whatever you want to call it, and there's only so many things that we can do to change that. No company is perfect. No human being is perfect. As long as you trust and respect the fact that the company operates ethically, that's kind of the baseline standard. But beyond that, I think, Dave, what really becomes important is you set the culture for your team. I have seen way too many managers who feel like, well, I get yelled at from my boss, and that gives me carte blanche to pass it on to everybody who's below me. And my answer is, that's where your assumption is wrong. You've got to change your sponsoring thought. Part of your job as a leader in the company is to shield your people from the stuff that may not be fair or you may not like, but to shield them from it so that it doesn't have to happen in your group that way. Culture is, with a capital C, it's the entire organization. With a small c, it's what I choose to control in my department at any given time, and I'm just not going to listen to that noise. It's very easy to either drink the Kool-Aid about what a wonderful organization this is, it's perfect, or to always find fault with the organization. And I think that's a mistake that managers make. Really, when you talk about leadership wisdom, the idea is, what can you control and what experience do you want your employees to have? So I usually take people in a training program through something that says, tell me about your favorite boss. And I want, tell me one thing about your favorite boss. So we go around the room and someone says, oh, my favorite boss, I always felt like she trusted me. She always had my back. She challenged me to do things I didn't even think I could do myself. But she made me feel like I always made a positive difference. And my argument to them, Dave, is think about what you're saying. This is all a function of the boss's beingness, not the boss's doingness. You're not describing that your boss, brought bagels and brought pom-poms every Friday morning. It's not what they're doing. It's who they are that causes them to do those things. So focus on your beingness. And literally, I'm not trying to get too hoity-toity here at 30,000-foot level, but then when you think about your favorite boss, my question to you is, who are you being that to at this point in your career? And if you're not being that to anyone, how do you turn it around so that you can get people to say, yeah, that Paul Falcone, he's the best boss I ever had? Because if you can do it that way, you'll have less turnover on your team. You'll have greater employee engagement, and you'll create an environment where people can motivate themselves. And that's another mistake that's out there. I think it's a wrong assumption, Dave. There's this assumption of you've got to do things to motivate people. That is not true. What you have to do is you have to create an environment in which employees can motivate themselves. And there's a very big difference. It sounds subtle, but it's pretty tremendous. The burden is not on you to do a million things as a leader. The burden on you is to set up an environment where people can find ways to gain traction, to put in, their own unique contributions and see the results on the back end. And your job is to guide them along the way. And that makes the leader the coach. And that's really where you want to be.
But Paul, in some places, there are special challenges a manager or a leader has because I don't want to go into too much detail about exactly how poor or poisonous an overall firm-wide corporate culture is, but there are some larger let's say, cultures. You know what I mean? And a couple of them come to mind in recent business press blog posts and news stories where the overall culture of the company is not good. You know what I mean? So these managers of teams almost are carrying a double load in that in the face of this poor larger culture, they have to form a positive, almost like tribal culture, a micro culture. You know what I mean?
Correct.
So that they can succeed in spite of the larger, poorer conditions. Does that make sense?
It certainly does.
But it's also, that's kind of the everyday heroics of being a good manager. I can read any book I want to about how awesome Steve Jobs is or Jeff Bezos or something like that, but it's these, leaders of frontline teams, these smaller organizational, structures that are really, in my mind, the heroes of this whole story.
And I totally agree. And I think, Dave, the reality is you can hear claims about, unemployment is low and all that's great. But the truth of the matter is that technology changes so quickly and the globalization has come into play so quickly that it's the middle class management jobs that have in many ways been the ones impacted by technology. This job no longer exists. So-and-so didn't just lose his job, he lost his whole career. And it scares people. And there's no, we're going through presidential elections or whatever we happen to be doing as a society at any given time. It's like no one's going to change that. That genie is out of the bottle. No one's going to say that the technology we introduced last year we're going to take back so we can give people more jobs. And people are frightened. And when people are frightened, what I've always found is you don't always see the best side of humanity when people are running for their life vest. And that's kind of where we've become. We've kind of gotten there as a society because the changes, if you look at it very positively, it's like, well, we're creating middle classes all over the world. China, Russia, Brazil, they're all getting middle classes. They never had that before. That's wonderful. But where's all the value coming from that's creating those is actually coming from the United States. Is it right or wrong? That's a bigger topic. But historically, we're a country with less than 5% of the population that had two-thirds of the world's wealth. And the Internet has changed all that. But with this tremendous change, yes, there is opportunity, which we like to hear when we come on seminars like this. But the other part of it is there's fear, and people are frightened. And from that frightening, especially as, there are layoffs, or, there may be more layoffs, or who knows what's going to happen, and the job security thing, I've been working here for 20 years, and now my job is in jeopardy. It's very, very hard to see the bright spots in there. But what I can tell you is this, having lived through this myself in different industries where my job has been impacted, I still say, to your point, as you call it, tribal culture or microculture, that's where your fun is. That's where you can control things. The bottom line is no one's going to say Paul Falcone is guaranteed employment. We know that generation is gone. That birth to cradle, what are they, cradle to grave employment? That doesn't exist anymore. Okay, we get that. And we know the younger ones, the millennials, are having a challenge trying to fit in too because they've seen their parents laid off. So they don't have a total amount of, blind loyalty to companies, and rightfully so. I get that too. But I think the idea, Dave, is if we sit back and we just say, look, I can observe this without judging it. I can look at the what so without looking at the so what, so to speak. In other words, I won't judge it. I'm just going to say this is where we are at this stage in our economic development. The truth of the matter is with all of these challenges, people are spooked. It's very, very hard for people to kind of see the brighter spot of things. Yet I'm going to say where you define yourself as a leader is despite all those challenges, I don't care what those challenges are, what experience do you try and set for your own employees? Because what you give to someone else, you're actually giving back to yourself. Give to them, it will come back to you. The ultimate, we can't totally control these days because companies are changing too quickly. Every day you open up the newspaper, there's a new story about what's going on with mergers, acquisitions, downsizing. It's a hard challenge. But again, if people really feel in their heart of hearts they can no longer support the organization because it's just changed too much and they're not seeing the kinds of people that they really feel they can trust, the trust is the differentiator. You like your boss, you respect your boss, that's fine, but do you trust your boss? And if the trust isn't there, I think that's the deal breaker. So then you might have to look at changing operations and joining a new team. That's not the worst thing in the world. Sometimes it's a healthy thing, but I think you have to look at it all together that way.
Trust being an important essential item, a lot of that follows how a manager communicates. Can you offer some advice to managers with becoming a more constructive or proactive communicators, Paul?
Part of it is, I think a good manager, even in tough times like this, is able to make him or herself vulnerable. not to the point where they're going to lop my head off, vulnerable to the point where you can make it safe for your own people to allow their own vulnerabilities to come out. There's a whole TED Talk on the importance of vulnerability in the workplace, and when you talk about, the emotional intelligence of people who can kind of set that tone. If people are operating by fear, Dave, it's really hard. And I think the trust, number one, comes from respect. The way you treat people is the way you should expect them to treat you. But, each to his own without judgment to a degree. But I think that selfless leadership, if you remember in the late 1970s, the article came out about the servant leader. I'm still a big believer in that because it works for me. It has always worked for me. And I found that my employees on the teams where I've worked have always responded very, very well to the sense of selflessness and putting others' needs ahead of your own, but also expecting them to respond in kind. Now, another piece about it is holding people accountable. The trust element is great. A little bit of that trust, but you have to make sure that you're working with them for them to set their own performance goals, right? It's goal setting time or whatever. What's important to them is important to you. You make sure in your role that what's important to them is aligned with the organization's greater good. But the bottom line to it is where the trust comes from is creating an environment where people can find their own way. Quick example, we raise little kids, and we have them, by the time they're 5 years old, they've done football and hockey and taekwondo and ballet and ice skating and all these other things, because we basically want them to find something that they like, where they can gain traction, and where they can make themselves excel. In many ways, though, that paradigm works in the workplace too. We're not treating it the same way, but the reality becomes, if you're a really good leader, you're helping people focus what they enjoy and what they're most interested in and aligning it with where the organization is going, and then you just step out of the way. The best leaders are the ones who give their people the freedom to gain their own traction. That's where the trust comes in. When, again, you ask the question to the class, tell me about your best boss that you ever had, one of the first things they say is, she trusted me. She trusted me to make the right decision. She trusted me to show the right judgment. And that's something that builds people, and that's the greatest gift that the workplace offers. I always say leadership is the greatest gift that the workplace offers because it allows you to touch people's lives and help them build their careers. And people will remember that 50 years from now when you retire, and you can't even remember who the person is, and they're going to come up and say, Paul, you may not remember this, but one time you told me blah, 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 and it changed my whole life. That's what's cool about what we're doing. So we can't change the fact that the country was in a war in 1942. We couldn't change that. We can't change Great Depressions. We can't change the fact that all the technology today is totally changing the work around us and what we do and unsettling us. But those challenges, those are always going to be there. The reality becomes, who are you? That's your question. Who are you as a leader? And how will you take this and turn it into something that's more positive for you and for your people?
There are any number of Harvard Business Review articles on this sort of concept, some going back to the post-World War II type of thing, and it all revolves around this concept of, so how do I motivate? How do I motivate my employees? What's the Falcone method for motivation?
Well, again, I'll go back to stepping out of the way. The thing about the motivation, to me, that people motivate themselves. First of all, don't it again with what do you have to do to motivate? You're asking the question the wrong way. My motivation rules had always been, number one, what you want for yourself, give to another. Are you the best boss you've ever worked for, so to speak? Would people on your team want to work for you? And that little litmus test is very, very inspiring in terms of, I don't know if they would really be happy. I don't know if people on my team would say, I'm the best boss they've ever had. But, there is something I can do about that. I want to look into it. I think the idea of being this trumps doing this is still a very important concept here. Again, that is very practical. The books out there, 1,001 Ways to Motivate Your Employees, those are great books. I'm not taking away from them. But they focus on what you need to do as a boss, and I think they miss the point. The truth of the matter is it's who you need to be. Your people will motivate themselves when they work for someone they like, trust, and respect, and they feel like that person has their back. You will get much more out of your employees when you can create that kind of environment. And then the other thought, Dave, honestly, is you got to give more time to your people. And that's the one thing where managers sit back and they're like, Paul, it's the only thing I don't have. Are you kidding? And my answer is, slow down. I've been there. I know what it's like to sit in 6 hours of meetings every day while your emails come in like Vegas slot machines. And then you have all weekend where you have to catch up just to be ready for Monday morning. I know. I understand what that's like. I'm not talking about taking away from doing your own work to go out there and sit with your people for hours at a time. But you do have to do management by walking around. You do have to get out there and talk to people about non-work related things. They have to see your humanity. They have to be able to relate to you on that level. I had gone into one company once, David, and it was interesting, where I always walk around and I like to talk to people and see how they're doing. I have a portion of my day where it may only be 10 minutes. Sometimes I can get 30 minutes, but I want to get out there and at least see some people that I haven't seen in a while. And the one sales manager said to me one time, he said, Paul, it's funny. When HR used to come around, we used to say, oh my gosh, what's wrong? Is there a sexual harassment investigation? HR is here. And he said, you didn't come by for about a week, and 2 people on my team said, hey, Paul's not been around. Is everything okay? What's going on? He said, you're the first time we had an HR person where if you're not around, they're questioning what's going on. And that isn't like, well, I didn't do all my work. This is a good investment because it's helping you build the frontline leadership muscle. It's giving them confidence that you're HR and you've got their back. And it also makes it easier for them to approach you with minor problems before they become major impediments. And the problem is, in a lot of organizations, because they don't have that natural rhythm, that natural flow back and forth with whoever their HR person is or even their department head, you don't hear about things until they're about ready to blow. And then all the drama comes. And as you know, I hate drama. I don't want to do that. So it's like, but you've got to set it up the right way so that people can feel motivated, people can feel like they do their very best work, people can assume good intentions, and people can assume as a team that we've got each other's backs. And that's one of those things that I think as a leader, you've got to make sure your people understand that. We've got your back, we're all in this together, and we're going to make it happen. You don't have to use the words we're a family because I know companies don't like that anymore. But truthfully, being Italian, I kind of like the metaphor. To me, I excel better when I know that people are assuming good intentions, we're all working towards the same goal. And all the noise aside, we really do like each other, and that really helps for everyone to perform at their highest level.
So we've gone down, I think, the pretty positive path here, and you did talk about drama and your aversion to drama. What can a manager do to avoid or strategize or come up with tactics to keep things from getting dramatic, and even to the point of things getting ultra dramatic with even litigation or lawsuits or stuff like that? How can managers prepare themselves for that, or at least direct and navigate their way in and around that type of minefield?
Okay, so a couple of things. The things I always talk about is the importance of mediating disputes. Sometimes you see people on your teams and they're not getting along real well, and the managers just avoid it and hope it fixes itself, which 99% of the time it does not. And the wounds fester over time, and people really start to kind of calcify in terms of who's not talking to whom and other things like that. So one of the things I would say, Dave, my best advice is teach your managers how to mediate employee disputes. Get in there, throw yourself in, make sure you got both sides talking to each other. Normally, as the manager, I recommend you talk to employee A first before you talk to employee B. But you tell employee A, everything you tell me, I'm listening to, I'm taking notes, but everything that you tell me, I'm going to tell employee B as soon as we're done. I'm going to meet with employee B. I'm going to listen to everything she has to say. I want to hear her side of the story. And when I'm done talking to her, I'm telling her that I'm coming to talk to you. And we're going to make sure that the what is out of the box. The genie needs to be out of the box. And tomorrow, we're going to sit together. I want you guys to sleep on it overnight, but tomorrow we're going to talk about the how. We got the what out of the way today. Tomorrow we talk about how we're going to fix this and how we're going to reinvent ourselves, because most adults are not ready to sit down. And managers do this all, sit down, you two, and we're going to fix this right here and right now. They're not ready. They're in total defense mode. They're afraid of what the other person is going to say. And so the best defense is an offense where they go on the attack. Too much drama. Better off to be very transparent about those things and how you fix it, because I think the way you motivate employee disputes is really important. The second thing I would say on that, Dave, though, is you've got to have a manager who, when they're going through their expectations of how you lead our team, or our expectations in terms of how you'll perform, they need to be able to talk about things that are fairly subtle. And I think that when we distinguish performance versus conduct, when we talk about sameness versus consistency, we've got to kind of create an expectation of fairness, because you have to remember, when there's ever any kind of lawsuit regarding discrimination, is basically a lawsuit about unfairness, except it's unfairness that happens to a protected class. And so once the unfairness happens to a protected class, it is now, by definition, a violation of the law, and that's where the punitive damages can come in. I think the managers need to know how to set the expectations the right way, how to talk to their team about how we're going to solve problems and resolve issues that come our way, how we're going to work together. And more importantly, I would tell my teams, you guys, I talk a lot about the word perception. Perception is really, really important. And that perception is, they used to call them PR firms, now they call them perception management firms. But the truth of the matter is we are all responsible for our own perception management. And that means that you may say something that you didn't intend to hurt someone or you don't think it should have hurt their feelings. But if it hurt their feelings, I'm going to go by them and how they felt about it and then come back to talk to you about it. No drama. We fix it one time. We sit down and we take care of it. But this idea of where the respect comes from is people know Paul's not going to put up with BS on his team. He's just not going to do it. He's not cut that way. If it happens, he's going to fix it right then and there. He's going to lock it down. No harm, no foul. He doesn't judge anyone. We shake hands and we move forward. But that's the reputation that I want to have, because with a reputation like that, you can build weak teams into strong teams. You can do turnaround situations. You can grow the most leaders. You can do all kinds of things. But there's no drama because there's total transparency, and it's full honesty, and you're holding people to their own perception management, which basically means regardless of your intentions, if that's the way you're coming across, I need you to kind of reinvent yourself. Mm-hmm. Those kinds of discussions will fix those problems pretty quickly.
Perhaps one of the things that a manager dreads most is actually having to let an employee go. When you come to that bridge and it needs to be crossed, how can a manager prepare for this idea of a clean termination?
One of the things I've always told managers is, afraid of getting sued is the cost of doing business in corporate America from time to time. You can't manage by fear of a lawsuit. You'll be like a deer in the headlights. But you just have to make sure if we're going to get sued, we get sued on our own terms. And that finds its way into the dialogue, into the conversation in a number of ways. But one of the things is when you're finally going to terminate someone, and it could be termination for cause, they violated the terms of a final written warning. It could be a position elimination, we're laying them off. Treat them with the utmost dignity and respect. No one comes to work coming to work saying, I'm going to really try and blow it today. They don't. For whatever reason, they may not have been capable of doing those jobs. They had other things in their lives that got in the way of doing the work the right way. So the lawsuit is a tool of workplace revenge. Okay, you strip people of their dignity, and when they're most vulnerable, they can't sleep, 3 o'clock in the morning, they're so angry they're watching television and call 1-800 blah, blah, blah. The lawyers are all running their ads, right? Because they want people to say, yeah, call us and we'll get back at that company for you. If you can treat people with respect and dignity, I tell people, listen, I'm sorry it didn't work. If I can help you with your resume, if I can help you with the networking, I'll help you. Don't worry about that. But at this point, I hope you can respect the fact that we have to move in another direction. And it's like they look at you and they're like, look, they're not happy, but they can get on with their lives. They can heal. Don't strip them of their dignity and humiliate them when they're most vulnerable, because then they're going to try and find a reason to come back with a lawsuit because they feel like the company was a jerk and really took advantage of them when the company held all the cards. It was just a David and Goliath moment, and the company took advantage. And you know what? Now I'm going to take advantage by calling this lawyer. That reality does happen from time to time, and the best way to get around that is to just be transparent, be honest. It's okay to thank people. You don't have to say, I'm sorry that we're firing you. What you can say is, I'm sorry it's come to this, that the situation has gotten to this level, but I hope you can respect our decision that we need to move in another direction. And you know what? They'll be okay. They can get on with it because they were treated respectfully. And that's all people are really looking for, even when they're being terminated for cause.
And just to wrap it up here, one final question, and then we'll get to everyone's questions that have come in here. If you could offer one bit of advice to a new manager, and you only had, a quick elevator ride or a quick bus ride to do that with, what would you leave that new manager with?
Interesting. Teach your people the importance of thankfulness and appreciation. What I've always found, this is with kids, this is with adults. When people come from thankfulness and appreciation, they see the world a different way. When they come from bitterness, there's never enough. I call it not enoughness. There's not enough time. There's not enough resources. Our systems are no good around. Blah, 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 blah. What you find is you're constantly going through this roller coaster effect with them. And where the wisdom to me comes in is sitting with people and saying, you know what, it's not a perfect company. We're not perfect human beings, but we are trying to have fun. and we are making a difference in the world, and our department is recognized. We are loved by our clients. We are recognized always in a positive sense for all that we're doing to kind of help them run their business. This is obviously an HR speech that I give. But you guys, we have to come from an appreciation standpoint. We have to come from recognition that we're making a difference, that we matter, that we care for each other, we have each other's backs. But if we can't get past that one basic assumption, there's going to be way too much drama around here. And I want your commitment that we're all going to move forward with that greater sense of appreciation and awareness for all the things we've been blessed with. And usually people will say, yeah, that's really nice. I think that's a good idea. And, they're fine. It's the end of the staff meeting. But the truth of the matter is that gets in, Dave. That really does get in, because if they understand that that's where their manager is coming from and that's where their manager is leading towards, people will respond to that. And the peer pressure fixes things too, because if anyone gets a little bit out of whack, they'll, hey, come on, you remember what Paul said. Now, come on, just stop that, knock it off. And it fixes the problem before it ever gets back to you as a manager again. I've written about that idea in a number of my books, but appreciation and thankfulness, teach it to the kids, teach it to your employees, and watch many of the problems just melt away.